Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists. President and CEO, Walmart Stores Incorporated, Michael T. Duke. Her Majesty, Queen Rania Al Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Secretary General, United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. President, World Bank Group, Jim Yong Kim. And welcome back our moderator, President Bill Clinton.
So, I want to begin with Mike Duke simply because I think you will see the point of this panel if we start from someone who runs a massive operation with a reasonable span of control and a reasonable amount of money where you can plan and execute design if you just make the right decision. So, Mike, talk to us a little bit about how over the last several years Walmart decided to try to become a green company, an environmentally responsible company, a combater of climate change, a reducer of greenhouse gas emissions. And what are the economics of it, and what's been the impact on your bottom line? And most important, how did you do it? We always assume that if you are on the top of a big totem pole and you tell people to do something, things happen. That's not necessarily true. So if you could talk about a little bit about how you came to do this and then how you actually executed it, I think it would be interesting. And then tell people a little bit about the sustainability efforts of Walmart.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and it's a great honor to be here. First, I also want to thank you for the plug you gave Walmart the other night. I saw the Daily Show, and you mentioned Walmart. And back home in Arkansas, we were thinking about, we've hit big time when a small company from Arkansas can be mentioned on the Jon Stewart show by President Clinton. We said we're really hitting it big time now. And you mentioned in that, even in that, our focus on renewable energy and sustainability and some of our areas. So I'm really honored to get to speak to that. And I think, first of all, I go back to our business, Walmart's size and scale. With our size of our company and the reach that we have, we believe with that comes a great responsibility, and we focus on our own responsibility in the world to the communities we serve, to the consumers, and to all the countries that we operate in, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously. Sometimes people will say that we're held to a higher standard of responsibility than maybe other retail companies. I say that's wonderful. I like being held to a higher standard. It'll make us a better company. I like when the world looks to us as a large retailer with high expectations, and I want to exceed those expectations. And I think that's what led us to originally even this focus on responsibility and sustainability. I'll also tell you, I think part of it goes back to our mission, our purpose of operating the business. Our real purpose and mission in our company, we talk about with our 2 million associates around the world, is to help consumers live a better life. And even more recently, we've looked at it long term. We want to do it over generations. And that's why we set aggressive goals. Our aggressive goals would be to be supplied by 100% renewable energy, to eliminate all waste, in other words, operate a zero-waste company, and then to develop products for our consumers that are sustainable so customers don't really have to make a choice about paying more for good, sustainable products that we can provide them for customers the way that they want. Those are our three big goals, and now working with our businesses around the world, we've had just great progress. We have a long ways to go, but we have great progress. So we've become, for example, in the area of renewable energy, the largest supplier or installer and user of solar energy in the United States. We have one distribution center, for example, in Arizona, Buckeye, Arizona. The equivalent use of solar there would power 400 homes. And so we can make an impact. We have 148 solar installations across the United States, and we think that that's just one example. But we have many examples of renewable energy, eliminating waste, and generating products that our consumers want that would be sustainable, because we really want to let consumers live a better life for many, many generations into the future, not just today. And all of this is good for business at the same time.
But how do you decide, so you have the goals, how do you decide when to stop? I mean, how do you decide that you want 148 solar buildings and not 195? How do you make these judgments? How is the cost benefit figured in? And do you believe this has been good for your bottom line and for your stock price?
This has clearly been good for our bottom line. And also those that monitor stock price, our stock price has done really well also. So I think it's clear that it's good for business, but we also see it as good long term, and we just don't see the end in sight. So growing the use of renewable energy sources, we certainly do have to look at it from a business standpoint. We want to invest and do it the right way, so we do evaluate and consider the financial impact, but we really see positive benefits of this, and that's why we keep moving ahead. What I'm really pleased, Mr. President, even the theme of this meeting on design and the focus on design, when we have the energy of 2 million people around the world that work for Walmart looking all for a better way, then we just end up with more great ideas than we can ever consider. And some are big ideas like the solar and wind and renewable energy, and some can be small ideas, just little packaging ideas about the way we package product or the way we develop product for consumers. And we have so far ahead, so much more to do, I think.
To give you an idea of one of their small ideas, when they reduced packaging of the things you buy there by 5%, it had the effect in the United States of taking more than 200,000 diesel trucks off the road. That's how they would define a small idea. But it shows you that if everybody did the same thing, it would be huge. And the point I want to make here, and then I want to go to our other panelists, is that I asked Mike before he came in if he thought this was just a function of Walmart being such a big company, and he said no, he thought the economics would work for anybody. It might change what you did first, whether you went to LED lighting first, as you've also done, or went to your packaging and changed your routing first. But basically what big operations have are design staff. That's why I wanted to do this. They have design staff. There are lots of people who do this work in the public and private sector, or in every other, not just in energy, but in other areas that don't think about conscious design, which is why I thought the conversation to open was important. So we'll go. Your Majesty, you have been involved in the UN and the Millennium Development Goals, and particularly you have been passionate about early childhood education and a number of other things in your region. So what does all this mean to you? What's the relevance of designing the right kinds of strategies to meeting the UN Development Goals and where we go from here?
Well, now we're looking at, we set the first set of Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, and now we're looking at the post-2015. So I think we need to look at where we were and where we are now. 2015 is not the same as 2000. Back then, there were only 700 mobile phones. There was no such thing as Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. Right now, they're part and parcel of modern life, and there are about 6 billion mobile phones around the world. So our technological capacity and our innovative capacity is unprecedented. There's more technology reaching more people in more places than any other time in history. So in designing for the future, the question that begs itself is, how can we harness this technological abundance to address some of the world's fundamental deficiencies. And just to illustrate this fact, researchers predict that in the year 2020, recorded human knowledge will double every 73 days. So this tech capacity that we have could really be a game changer in development. And we've seen that already. For example, in terms of polio vaccines, they've been game changers, oral rehydration therapy, high-yield cereals, all these have made a big difference. But still, we haven't begun to tap the potential. And I think that there is like I said, we have the potential technological capacity that is unprecedented, but we haven't matched that with the ability to harness that potential to solve everyday issues. Technology is not just for the individual, it's for humanity. Technology is not just for making our lives more convenient, but how can we use it to save lives? So, I mean, for example, when I was in India last year, I met with a group of young people called Embrace, and they developed those non-electrical warmers for premature babies. They're safe, portable, and a fraction of a price of a traditional incubator. And they saved hundreds of lives, if not thousands of lives. They were able to go in and save lives where others couldn't. Now, how can we do that across? It made me just think, I mean, if we can do that with something so simple and so inexpensive, how can we apply that to many areas of development? Innovation can literally mean the difference between a child being able to live and see his first day of school and his mother being able to see him go to school. So really the challenge is, where do you find the technology? How do you highlight it? And how do you turn ideas, which is really what the essence of the Clinton Global Initiative is how do you take ideas and turn them into action? How do you take them from the lab and bring them to the real world? And then how do you scale them up so that it really makes a difference and you get the multiplier effect for humanity as a whole?
Thank you. Well, that brings me to what I was affectionately referring to backstage as the Korean bloc. The president of the World Bank and the Secretary General were backstage talking to each other in Korean. We didn't have a clue what they were talking about. I think they were plotting to take over the world in computer download speeds. But that's already been done by Korea. Anyway, I want to ask a serious question of each of you in turn. So, Queen Rania just talked about the power of technology and what works and what doesn't. The thing that impressed me about Walmart was they didn't just get interested in solar power. They figured out where it would be most effective, where does the sun shine brightest, where is the cost per kilowatt hour lowest, and they went heavy into that. They said, yeah, we want to be the leading solar company in America, but we want to do it in a way that is most economical. Yes, we want to cut down this packaging and save the environment. We want to do it in a way that is most economical. So you guys run two of the most important institutions in the entire world. And you deal every day with the problem that my foundation deals with on a smaller level, which is how come in a world where nearly every problem's been solved by somebody somewhere, we can never seem to take it to scale? I mean, and that, it seems to me, requires not just putting more money into a given technological fix, but designing a strategy that will maximize the spread beyond what you or I or any of us do. So what are your thoughts about that? Are there design strategies we could adopt that would take this to scale? You just got back from Srebrenica. We have the leader of Kosovo here. I thank you very much for coming. And we have, there are all these places all over the world. They're all so different. So tell me, from the point of view of the United Nations and the World Bank, how can we respond to what Queen Rania said? How can we take what we know works to scale quicker because I'm not getting any younger. I'm impatient about this.
Thank you, President Clinton, for organizing this very important gathering where we think about designing for impact for humanity. To me, as a Secretary General, it looks like a mini General Assembly of the United Nations. We are going to have a general debate from Tuesday, day after tomorrow. It's a good opportunity for me, for all of us, to sharpen our ideas and our designs for impact. I'm going to sound alarm to all the leaders. To you, I see many distinguished heads of state and government and ministers and business community leaders. I'll be meeting the hundreds of leaders. I'm going to sound alarm about the situation where we are living in. We are living in an era of insecurity, injustice, inequality, and intolerance. Then what should we do? This is a collective responsibility of leaders at this time. I'd like to really focus and emphasize the political leadership. When we have a strong and clear vision, visionary leadership, I think we can resolve all these issues. Millennium Development Goals is fast approaching. We have to realize it and hit the target by 2015. We have then think about very seriously what we can leave to our succeeding generations after this post-2015. Sustainable development will continue to be top priority of our world today and beyond, at least several decades. In that regard, I really appreciate Her Majesty Queen Rania, who has joined the high-level panel of eminent persons which I have created. I hope that Your Majesty and other members will come out with a bold but practical solution for development agenda post-2015 for humanity. Before we go there, there are so many issues. Energy, sustainable energy, how we can reduce food and nutrition problems, how we can address all these water scarcities and climate changes. These are all we have been doing. I really appreciate what the Chairman, Mr. Duke, has been saying. Through their business forum, business leaders should have clear visions that what they do is not only for gaining profits. What they do is for the humanity. What his company, Walmart, is doing, I think is almost addressing all the issues which United Nations is doing. United Nations is just trying to liaise government, partners, business communities, civil society leaders, and NGOs and philanthropists to work together for common humanity. We would like to generate partnership. United Nations and governments cannot do it all alone. We have to have a legally binding treaty on climate change. We have to have a development agenda, very clear, visionary agenda. That's what we are doing. President Clinton, you mentioned my visit to Srebrenica. For me personally, or any Secretary General who will come after me, Srebrenica may be the last place or most difficult place to visit for any Secretary General of the United Nations. It was most humbling, sad, and troubling to realize that international community failed to protect the lives of many civilian population. We could have done it. We could have done it if there was a clear, strong political will. Why? For what? 8,000 boys and men were brutally murdered in just 3 days. when I was in Rwanda. How come and why more than 1 million people were killed like that way? International community lacked will to protect the civilian population, to protect the human rights, to promote and respect human dignity, inalienable right. This is what we have to do at this time. As we are living in an era of instability, inequality, injustice, we have to set this world right, put this world on a right track for humanity. That's what United Nations will continue to do, but I need your support. I need this CGI, Clinton Global Initiatives, strong support and engagement. I need all of you get engaged with the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to call you Mr. President now.
No, you don't.
But Jim, how are we going to do this if all these countries cut back on their foreign assistance investments? Well, one of the things I really admire about the UK, I don't really agree with the economic strategy of austerity now and worry about the rest later. I don't think you can grow an economy with no private activity and no interest rates and no inflation by having further austerity. But I do respect the fact that the British government has tried heroically to exempt from that austerity their investment in fighting poverty throughout the world, and to continue to honor its commitments. And every country in the world should respect that. That's been a really impressive thing they have done. They have labored to wall that off from the austerity covering the budget. But if all this happens, how are we going to do what the Secretary General said? How are we going to do what Queen Rania said? What's the World Bank answer to this? What is the way? How can we literally plan and execute our way through the current economic crisis without backsliding on all these goals we have?
You asked exactly the most important question. How do you go from promising initiatives to taking things to scale? And the good news is there are some examples of having done that. But that happened, for example, around efforts like smallpox eradication, when they very systematically thought scale is different from a successful pilot project. And I think, for me, I've been asking this question. My colleague Paul Farmer and I have been trying to think about this notion of actually delivering in the field and having results. What does that take at a small scale, at a medium scale, and in a global scale? Remember, more than a dozen years ago, Ira Magaziner came to see me on behalf of your foundation and said, what's the one thing we could do to help tackle the HIV initiative? And my answer was, tackle drug prices. And it wasn't the sexy thing, but that was critical. So I think, and you took that to scale. You were able to talk with manufacturers, you were able to talk with regulatory authorities, and we took it from costing thousands of dollars a year now down to, what, $75 or $50 a year. And it was only in that you thought about scale from the beginning that you were able to make that happen. So I would put it this way, putting some of these ideas together. I've just been in Cote d'Ivoire, in South Africa. I see some of my colleagues in South Africa here. They're asking very different questions because one is a post-conflict state. They just came out of a war. South Africa is a middle-income country, and their issues were very similar in this sense. If you put good policies in place, and if you're trying to do the right thing, how do we actually implement? How do we deliver on the promises that we've made to the people in our country? And I think that there's a lot to learn from the Walmarts of the world. Designing for impact, I think, means taking seriously this problem of scale, because if we're able to help President Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire deliver on his promises, the likelihood that he will prevent war in the future is very high. I was at a training program where former combatants were learning how to be electricians. And one young man stood up and said, you know, I'm a former combatant, and this is great for me. I'm going to have a job. But let me tell you, my brothers and my sisters and my friends don't have these opportunities. And if things get bad, the likelihood of us going back to war is very real. So this notion that we have to design for impact, that we have to share lessons across the world, is something that's very deeply embedded in the World Bank. We're now, Jim Wolfenson many years ago, your friend and my friend, talked about the World Bank as a knowledge bank. But I think we have to take it a step further. We have to go from a knowledge bank, because what does that mean? Does that mean sending everybody our documents that we write? Does it mean sending everybody our studies? We want to take the next step and become a solutions bank. And Secretary General and I have been talking about this because within the multilateral system, there are so many good examples of when we've been effective. We don't capture them, we don't codify them, and we are not good at spreading them. Mike Duke, when there's an innovation within Walmart, it spreads almost instantaneously. In the world of global development, if there's a good innovation, people in the next district, and you've seen this, don't pick it up. So one of the things we've been talking intensely about is how can we get better as a multilateral institution, capturing those solutions. And you've heard me talk about this. Can there be a science of delivery? Can there be a science of execution around social goals? We make a lot of promises, we set good policies, we get good people, and we often feel like we're done. But that's when the real business starts. And that's what we want to do at the World Bank and along with our partners in the UN. We want to be the place that has the solutions that might not work everywhere. And in fact, there's no such thing as what works. What worked in Kosovo or in anywhere may not work in your country, and it may not even work in Kosovo continuously. But if you have the commitment to continuously learn from what you're doing, I think that there's the possibility that we can contribute to stability. We've been very bad at pulling fragile states out of fragility. This is something that you know very well, working in Haiti, and I know it too. But the key, we know, security, system of justice, but jobs. What do we know about creating jobs in fragile environments? Well, folks in Mozambique, Uganda, and Rwanda have done pretty well coming out of conflict and creating relatively more stable economies. What were the lessons? The bank is full of master practitioners. These are the people who've been and watched all these things, but we haven't been systematic about capturing that knowledge and spreading it effectively. And we're committed to doing this together.
Well, thank you. First, let me just offer one observation. I do believe this was always my great frustration when I was a governor of an American state, and I was trying to help my schools get better, and I told everybody every problem in American education has been solved by somebody somewhere, but the solutions don't travel well. And it's still a big problem for us. And we disseminate some information better than others. For example, the human genome-related medical breakthroughs at the St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis, every time they make a new discovery, they immediately put it on the internet, and it goes to every cancer hospital in the world, including the newest one that I've been associated with, and Paul, the one you built in Rwanda, the Butaro Medical Clinic. All of a sudden, there's a doctor in Rwanda who knows how to save a child with a relatively rare but not unheard of form of brain cancer. But we're lousy at doing that in other ways. The Secretary General and the Queen Rania, if you listen to the talk, they're basically, you can talk about, we don't want Rwanda again, we don't want Srebrenica again. I think, in spite of the frustrations in Syria, which are highly complicated, as we all know, there has been a reasonable amount of progress in setting up institutions and designing them to keep bad things from happening. Now, it won't cover an explosion in some place, but it's better. It's quite another thing to make good things happen. And the real problem, if you look at, Your Majesty, the reason I always worried about Jordan was that if you have to take more refugees in, and your neighbor Yemen is poor, and all these people, all over the world, we all act like we know how to do it, but we're not very good at creating education and employment. And I think that in every place you can't just try to stop bad things from happening. You have to spend some time making good things happen. And the systems required to make good things happen are often have more moving parts even than the systems required to keep bad things from happening. So how do you think we ought to allocate our resources? The Secretary General spoke movingly because he has to live every day, every time somebody dies in another part of the world because of conflicts which they ought not be having. He has to go to bed thinking about it. So he has to think about trying to stop bad things from happening. But in my experience is that over the long run, you can't be successful in stopping bad things from happening unless there is some sort of trend line making good things happen. So what's your reaction?
Well, I think, with the Arab Spring, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, are we going to be saying, like the Secretary General is saying, that we could have done it? Or are we going to look back and say, we made good things happen? Because we're at a juncture now. And as a Secretary General, thank you very much for your vision for humanity and reminding leaders what the core of their responsibility is. And you mentioned dignity, human dignity. Well, it's funny that you should say that because for the audience here from the Arab world, the word karama was one of the strongest words that were heard in Tahrir Square. And karama translates in Arabic into dignity. And that word has echoed throughout the Arab world. And if you listen closely within the Arab context, the word dignity doesn't just mean political freedom or political justice and freedom from oppression. It also means, it meant economic freedom and freedom from want. The street vendor in Tunisia who set himself on fire, he wasn't an activist. He was a would-be entrepreneur who wanted to have access to capital and expand his business. Similarly, the designers of the Arab Spring were young individuals who were frustrated because they lacked the space and the hope to change their reality. And I always say the Arab world isn't a monolithic block. However, the Arab Spring traced the thread of discontent back to a shared identity, one that transcends borders and geography, but that's traced back to a shared identity, one that is jobless, young, frustrated, and not certain about the future. So the question is now, how, and what happened in the Arab world, you could say it's almost like a grassroots organic design. But then how do you take it from here and make it into a more structured, thought-out design that gives us the results that we want? I think a few things need to happen. First, we need to focus on the future. I think it's important to shift gears immediately from dissecting the past to designing the future. And the future is going to be uncertain, uneven, incomplete, but we have to move forward. Second, we need to realize that there isn't going to be one design that fits all. Each Arab country has to tailor-make its reforms to suit its own social, economic, and political situation. But all of them have to bridge the gap between government policy and the people's aspirations. And I think one of the most yawning gaps that you see in the Arab world is the youth unemployment. And I think that doesn't just apply to the Arab world, it applies all over the world, the United States and Europe. Too many young people are coming of age and not coming prepared because they never had the preparation. Which leads me to the third thing we need to do is we need another revolution in the Arab world. We need an education revolution, one that changes mindsets, the way we think of ourselves, the way we deal with each other, and the way we relate to the rest of the world. We need that to happen. If we want our young people to fulfill their dreams, to be able to get the jobs that they want, and for any young person all over the world, their number one insecurity, their number one challenge is knowing that they can secure a job. For them to be able to do that, we cannot keep giving them, we need to give them a 21st century education, one that empowers them to question, to debate, to accept values like pluralism and diversity. Fourth thing we need to do is we need to have courage, The courage that we saw on the streets needs to be taken into policy debates. We have a unique opportunity, at least in the Arab world, to deal with some fundamental challenges that we've had for decades. But to do that, we need to make some tough decisions. And sometimes these tough decisions will not be aligned with people's aspirations and their high expectations. But we need to have the intellectual courage to do what's right, even if it doesn't meet people's expectations, and even if it's not the popular decision. And I think we need to maintain our optimism. I know I am optimistic because when I speak to young people in the Arab world, they're buzzing with hope and energy. And don't underestimate their entrepreneurial spirit. In the Arab world, 15% of youth want to start their businesses next year. That's compared to only 4% here in the United States or in Europe. And we have some success stories in spite of the environment, not because of the environment. Now imagine if the governments provided an enabling environment, if the private sector jumped in to help. So in designing for the future, we need to be inclusive, make sure that the youth's voice is being heard. We need to, as I mentioned, harness technology, and we need to really lead with learning because education is absolutely fundamental.
So, Jim, thank you. So you just heard what the Queen said. We've got one of our Twitter questions asked if we can make the World Bank a solutions bank. Can there be an execution science around social goals?
Well, let me take this example explicitly. So I've been an educator all my life, and the challenge in the Arab Spring states is really critical. But so what did we learn from the Arab Spring? First of all, if you have economic growth and it's not inclusive, especially of young people, you're building in instability, potentially. And so the question then would be, so are there other places, have there been other choices that have been made that actually worked at a time when things looked really bleak? And I'll just take the country of the birth of both of Secretary General and I. In the 60s, they talked about South Korea as a basket case. And I read those studies that said South Korea will never develop. They don't have enough Western influence. The Confucian culture is going to hold it back. And then a couple decades later, they said South Korea is doing great because of Korean culture. The point, though, is that we should never, ever call any country a basket case ever again, because there's always, there are ways to rise out of, thank you. It's both arrogant and has been proven incorrect. So I, too, have great hope, but I think we've got to look at some of the choices. You know, the South Koreans made investments in education long before, in a sense, they could afford to. Healthcare, these kinds of investments we have to make. But a solutions bank would come to any Arab country and say, look, we have this wealth of experience, and one size doesn't fit all. But you got to try on some sizes to see if it works for you. And if it doesn't work, we'll help you get out and try something else. And so there are so many good examples. You know, the World Bank itself, you know, what we did in Bosnia at one point, what we did in Turkey. There are examples, and I've been going around the institution talking to people. There are fantastic examples of when multilateral institutions, donor institutions, businesses have just been great. And the point is, we need to capture those desperately so we can give advice on how to develop an educational system, on how to do something that I would love to see a commitment coming out of here. You know, in places like the Arab Spring countries, in places that I visited in Africa, you know, the formula is pretty straightforward. Governments have to be strong, there has to be good rule of law, there has to be health and education, but everybody wants growth in the private sector. We're publishing our jobs report, the World Development Report on jobs. 90% of all jobs are created by the private sector. Every country in the world, almost every country in the world, wants to have growth in the private sector, and they want to do it in a way that will benefit the entire population. So how do we figure out that problem? There must be a way for us to make some commitments together. You know, we at the World Bank and in the UN institutions, we know a lot about how these countries work. But now we need forward-thinking people who are ready to make the kinds of investments that will really hold that bright future. I'll never forget that young man who said, for me, job training and jobs is the difference between me being a combatant and me not being a combatant. And I think that's going to hold true throughout the developing world.
But to address that issue, I mean, finding the job, if there's one thing we need to focus on, it's redesigning our educational systems, because at the moment, we are teaching yesterday's skills. In a lot of the education systems, there's a big gap between what the market demands, the kind of skills that the market demands, and the kind of skills that we're teaching in our schools. We're just not giving the young people the kind of skills. And when I talk about education, it's not just about education, it's about learning. Education is part of learning. Education is about having a good school environment, the teachers, the textbooks that take you from early childhood all the way through secondary school and beyond. But you also have to teach them, young people, the skills, 21st century skills of communication, of leadership, of problem solving. You also have to give them training from technical to vocational and beyond. All of those things can help bridge the gap. At the moment, the demands of the private sector, the skills that they need, are much higher than they were before. And the gains that you can get from getting a primary education, they don't give you the same boost that they gave you even 5 years ago. So not only are we not investing enough in education, but the gap between our education outputs and what the market requires is getting wider by the day. And a lot of our young kids are coming into the workplace with irrelevant skills and knowledge.
Mike, do you have any stores in the Middle East or North Africa?
No, sir, we're not in the Middle East or North Africa. We do in sub-Saharan Africa with an entry last year into South Africa and operating in 14 other African countries, and then throughout Asia.
If the new president of Libya asked you to open a store in Tripoli, would you consider it? I'm just asking. I'm not trying to trick. This is not a trick. I'm trying to get at what the Secretary General or the head of the World Bank could design to get global investment into troubled places. Several years ago, I tried to I worked for years on this, and we finally did it to no effect, setting up some sort of political risk insurance that would be available to companies to try to get investors to come into troubled areas all over the world and do what the Queen Rania just said, train people, expose them to the newest technologies. I thought the worst that could happen is, even if the business failed or political trouble overcame it, is you have a whole new set of trained workers everywhere in the world.
We do that. We do that.
I know you do, but what would you think of somebody, suppose I called you and I was president of any of these countries, these new companies, democracies, and I said, would you think about coming here? How would you go about making the decision, and what would bother you?
First, I would say that the history of our company is that even back to the beginning of the United States is sometimes serving customers that were underserved, maybe where other traditional retailers did not go to serve them. We thought that was an opportunity to serve customers. And as we've gone into international markets, we've had the same consideration as not just following everyone else, but to serve underserved customers. And certainly we evaluate risk. I would not want to give any impression that our own business doesn't look at both the risk and then what the opportunity are. But we operate today in high-risk markets, and we operate very successfully. And I will tell you that I think part of it is because we look at the holistic approach to operating a business. Some of our commitments on women's economic empowerment in emerging markets, as we were talking about education, I would say to business leaders, we do play a really critical role in that education, that job skills training. And even I like to personalize it. In India, for example, we trained thousands of young people that would come from villages and very poor communities in India that would not have thought they would have an opportunity for a job. And we would teach them job skills and how to operate in retailing and to serve customers. What comes to mind is a young lady that I met on my last trip. Her name was Amandeep, and I won't ever forget her or her name because she stood up when I visited their training class, and she said, Walmart has changed my life. Now because of this extra job training, now she's working for us in serving customers in one of the retail stores in India. We do that in Brazil and other emerging markets. So I do think that these markets that others might not serve is a place of business opportunity that businesses should consider.
Let me ask you this. Maybe that we should ask our international leaders to close because we're about out of time, but Secretary General and President Kim, if you just listen to what Queen Rania and Mike Duke just said, if you look all around the world, what people really want is a job or a business. That's what they want. Everywhere in the world, there's a shortage. You walk down the street of any middle-sized town in the United States, you go to Tahrir Square and you talk to a country where they have 400,000 university graduates a year and nowhere near 400,000 university-level jobs being created every year. You go anywhere, you hear this. Should we be, just apropos of exactly what our last two speakers have said, should we be focusing, the CGI, the United Nations, the World Banks, should we be trying to go to these really troubled places or places where the incomes are low and try not right now, integrate a 21st century education training system where you don't have education over here and the economy over here, but you ask them to do it together. We start with a whole different model of how we can move people into the workforce and at least maximize their chances that they'll have something to look forward to when they get up in the morning. Should we do this more?
Mr. President, that's a very important theme, a partnership. Like big institutions, influential institutions like CGI and many civil society, it should not be big, even small. I think it's quite simple. For you to participate and contribute to all the problems which we are now experiencing. As the Secretary General of the United Nations, one of the important lessons which I have learned is that any government, any multilateral organizations like the United Nations or your government cannot do alone properly in addressing all the issues. You need to get support from business community. You need to full participation and involvement of civil society. We need to have a tripartite partnership. When you have a tripartite partnership established, we can address all these issues. This is one good lesson which I learned, and I'm asking you. For example, United Nations 12 years ago established United Nations Global Compact Initiative. And this is where more than 8,000 business companies are participating under 10 important guidelines, a framework. It involves all the basic principles, good governance, democratic good governance, and anti-corruption, transparency, accountability, human rights, a good management relationship. By doing that, they are participating actively in addressing climate change and water issues and the job creations. We really appreciate. This has been most successful partnership which we have been establishing. Every Woman, Every Child initiative, which we have been successfully launched, is also a very important one, saving a lot of children's and women's lives. And sustainable energy, this is one of the most successful ones. Therefore, there are a lot of areas where you can participate. I would really hope you will actively participate in all these initiatives. Education, I think this is a foundation of everything. On Wednesday, I'm going to, for the first time, launch a global education first initiative together with the Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, and the former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. This will be one of the biggest initiatives. I hope you will also support this one. Therefore, I would really urge you to be part of this process. just get involved. It's very simple. Raise your voice. And sometimes, if necessary, you challenge your president, prime ministers, ministers, CEOs, senators, congressmen, so that they can move toward the correct visionary direction. And before it is too late, we have to take. We should not regret for what we have not done today, what we could have done today. Look at the case in Syria. Before it is too late, we have to bring this crisis to resolution. We only need united efforts. Security Council, United Nations, and Arab leaders, and people of Syria. United Nations will continue to address this issue before we regret again. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, thank you. Real quick, let me answer your question. We need to leapfrog generations of bad practice in education. And you've had people here, friends of mine, Wendy Kopp, Saul Khan, lots of interesting ideas about how you can leapfrog generations and get kids learning using technology, using good software. There's so many good ideas. We need to do that. Now, let me just make a pitch here. So many of you know that the World Bank works with governments, but we also work in the private sector. We have an international finance corporation that gives loans to the private sector, but also makes direct equity investments. And we are looking at risk and potential reward in some of the poorest countries all the time. We would be happy to work with any of you to share that information, to give you a better sense of what it would mean. I think some of the highest growth areas in the future could be places like Africa. In fact, in the Arab world, you can't be a responsible investor without looking at those opportunities, and we know a lot about them. We have a multilateral investment guarantee where we do just that, give political insurance. So it's not going to happen if we don't put the educational systems together, as you said, but we have to not go through the regular ranks. There's so many possibilities with technology and the great software and leadership ideas that are emerging. And finally, don't assume that no one understands how these economies work. We're looking at them all the time. We're assessing risk all the time. We're looking at potential investment returns in these countries all the time. And there are good investments everywhere. And I think, as a World Bank, we'll always insist that economic growth be inclusive. We know what happens when it's not. The Arab Spring taught us that, and we've learned that lesson again and again. But investment, in fact, is what's needed. Everybody wants a good job. This is what you hear everywhere. President Clinton is exactly right. And it strikes me, being in this room, that I'm usually a very optimistic guy, but I'm even more optimistic that we could have this conversation with all of you. Right now, everybody in the world is looking for solidarity. The Europeans, of course, are talking about this all the time. The solidarity that you have generated with the Clinton Global Initiative is needed more than ever. And it includes things like making sure that educational systems are in place and that we are investing in places that look risky, but in fact are quite promising. So I thank you all for being here. I thank President Clinton for just the years of the enormous contributions that you've made. And I hope you will see very, very soon us talking about a solutions bank that's going to make a big difference throughout the world, along with the UN system and our partners.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give our panelists a hand. I will leave you with this one thought. Sometimes it is really a good thing not to overthink something and not to overlook some more simple thing at hand. Paul Farmer and I were just in Rwanda dedicating this hospital. Last year, more than 700,000 people in a country of 11 million were lifted above the global poverty line because the government gave every rural family a cow. It sounds funny. They also, in every little rural village, set up facilities so that the cows could go into their own stalls and be milked and cared for. But I just leave you with this thought. If you're trying to design a system and you're starting from scratch, there may be things that can be done that you would never imagine yourself doing. that could still drastically change lives for the better for other people. Thank you and bless you. Let's get on with the program.